North London just went white for the first time in the WSL. So let's talk about it. Well, if it isn't the WSL delivering a little bit more drama here once again, as that spot for the title, as well as the last 3 spots to qualify for the Champions League, continue to get tighter and tighter each season. Spurs started off the year in a relegation battle and now are ending the year after a huge, massive victory against Arsenal for the first time in their history. Well, it's certainly been an up and down season for both clubs. For Arsenal, they started things getting knocked out of the Champions League. Their opening game against Liverpool was a loss. Their first few games weren't totally convincing. However, they were able to slip back into form, have a great result against Chelsea, but simply were not able to continue that momentum here against Spurs. Whereas for Tottenham, obviously a new head coach, a lot of high hopes. They started off pretty well, a lot of goals being scored and a lot of clean sheets being had, but it was a relatively easy-ish set of games that they had at the start. Obviously, that is not taking in the Chelsea loss. And then they were able, obviously, to come up against Manchester City, losing 7-0. And then that was followed with another loss against United. However, they were able to draw and correct some things against Arsenal. And that's exactly what we're going to be breaking down today. As I break the game today, we will take a closer look at some of the footage, some of the screenshots, and also compare it slightly to the Manchester City game. And here's why. So both of the opposition, Arsenal and City, were sitting at a 2.5 expected number of goals. Obviously, Arsenal scored 9, City scored 7. For Spurs, they sat at a 0.4 against Arsenal, scored 1, and sat at a 0.6, scored none against City. So a pretty similar comparison of the number of expected goals. Not that that usually tells you what the scoreline is, but final XG is certainly a number to always look at and consider when comparing results. That 7-0, you can consider it as an absolute hammering. City were as clinical as one can be, which is great because that has always been their downfall, and Tottenham were absolutely abysmal in their defending. Whereas for Arsenal, they were absolutely abysmally unclinical. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm making it one. Whereas for Tottenham, their defending that game was actually spot on, and there was a lot of learned lessons taken against City and applied to the Arsenal game. So in this new setup with the new head coach that they're currently working with, off the ball, you will likely find them in a 4-4-2 layout, especially against teams that are pressing. So against City, against United, against Arsenal, this is kind of what they were adopting off the ball. A 4-4-2 is what you will likely consistently see them do. And against Arsenal, they held on to their shape very, very well. They had to because of the amount of pressure that they were receiving. But this tells you that they came in focused, knowing exactly how they wanted to, I guess, absorb that pressure, which is be structured, have a 4-4-2, not a lower block, but certainly kind of deeper, where Arsenal were looking to press. So this was earlier on in like the 13th-ish minute. I couldn't get the timeline for this one, but again, this was a few minutes later. You will see them in a 4-4-2 setup, almost standing in the same area, like a little bit more towards into their half, obviously. In the 27th minute, this was an attacking build-up that Arsenal started from the back for Manu Zinsberger. Again, a 4-4-2, you can't really see the back line, but it was a 4-4-2 setup that they were holding. This was also seen against Manchester City. They didn't really hold on to this very, very well, and actually, if you go back and watch all 7 of the goals, you'll see them very poorly executing that 4-4-2, often really out of position. This was actually the build-up for the second goal. Now, against Manchester City, Spurs were not only out of structure and just really poorly defensively structured in the back, but that allowed City a lot of freedom on the wings, as well as basically having the runners unmarked in the box. Now, the 2 players that you're looking at that are very dangerous in the air is obviously Shaw for City and Alessia Russo for Arsenal. I'm not going to compare their stats this season aerially because they're a little bit skewed, but looking at last season, both of them sit very, very close in the amount of duels won in the air and just goals scored from headers. So for Shaw and City, she had a great time exposing all the space that she was in, and it was really, really poor marking from Tottenham. Like, you go back to that game and it is just terribly poor when it came to any sort of defensive play. Wingers were able to overlap, wingers were able to work together, they were able to move the ball again as comfortably as they did, and City are masters at that. But whereas for Arsenal, you could see that they were doubling up. There was positions that they're in again a 3v3 or 3v2, which we will go through a little bit more here. So just looking at that first goal for City. So here's a clip of the first goal that City had. Like I mentioned, you really don't see a lot of challenge on the wingers. Shaw able to run really to where she wanted to run and get that header very, very freely. This is not what we saw against Arsenal, and again, I will take in the fact that this is the bigger pitch because they were playing in the Tottenham Men's Stadium. But again, you can see Alessia Russo is very closed down, like she didn't have a lot of space to run into, and there was always backup players working around her in the box. In the box, it was quite congested with Tottenham players rather than Arsenal. Not the case when they were playing against Manchester City. Forward here, Caitlin Ford was pretty busy, and we'll talk a little bit more about her shot choices, you could say, her decision making. But she didn't have as much enjoyment as the City wingers purely because she was always double marked. Now she can work around that. We know she's very good when it comes to 1v1, but it's not necessarily a comfortable position that you want to end up consistently and constantly. Even on the other wing here with Mead and Neville, who had a lot of duels and a lot of fights. I think Neville is a player that consistently doesn't get the praise she deserves because she's so consistent. But again, she gets past her but is not really in a comfortable position, and there's always support coming down on those wings. You look at Alessia Russo, two players are on her, and she really doesn't have that much space to exploit like Bunny Shaw did. This is the second goal for Manchester City. Again, another header in a very similar fashion for Shaw. Very easy to get. You know she's going to finish these. Very easily moved on to Hemp, who then finds Roord there. Again, really not much of a challenge. Shaw is able to run very easily and freely. Another moment here seen with the adjustment of two marked players, one covering the overlap, just making it much harder for Arsenal to find an opportunity to get into the box with, again, Alessia Russo consistently covered very well. Here's actually how the pattern looked like for Arsenal. They can get across in, so they had to recycle the ball. Now, this is not necessarily like a negative thing. It's not a bad thing where they have to recycle the ball, but Arsenal recycled the ball probably one too many times where it was just uncomfortable, and you actually see them lose possession. Out of this one, they are recycling the ball. So this was another thing that Spurs did really well here. And this is what I mean by the three players on either wings just always being present there, being aware of who the Arsenal runner might be. 3v3, 3v2, 2v2, they were always present, and they just did not allow any room for the Arsenal wingers to really breathe. And this is how they got caught in the overlap. Again, they can see the run. There's two players. They're following it. Really good defending from Spurs, and just not creative enough from Arsenal, because Spurs really had them figured out on the wings, knowing what they can do, and they regain possession and recycle it really well, like we saw in the last two plays. Like I showed you with the second City goal, look at all that space that Roord is able to run into. Again, this is like night and day to what you saw against Arsenal. So what I like here from Tottenham is that they clearly learned a lot of lessons. Like, this was a very sloppy, poor outing against City in general, but they went back to the drawing room, they looked over footage, and they were like, right, we are coming up a team very similar to City in terms of how they build on the wings and who they have aerially as a threat in the box. We cannot come out like this because we will literally get battered with another 7 goals. Again, they had very similar expected number of goals, but Tottenham needs to be given some praise with what they did defensively in the middle, box marking, as well as on the wing, just not allowing them a lot of space and pushing them to recycle balls over and over again. Switching gears to how they built up and what really changed significantly from the first half to the second half is who is dropping in to receive that ball, who is playing more of like a false 9, a number 10 to get the ball. Obviously, Beth England's come back, and it's going to be a very interesting discourse to see how Martha Thomas and Beth England work together, because I think it's a very interesting just duo that you can come up with a lot of creative ideas between the two of them. But in that first half, you can clearly see the intent of what Tottenham was doing, which is basically have Beth England drop very deep and get the ball to her, and then from there get an attack going. Now, obviously, Beth England's just come back from injury. You're going to see a little bit of field rust, I don't know, ring rust, whatever you want to call it, but it's a little bit rusty, and that's normal with any player that comes back from a pretty significantly long layoff. Neville, like I mentioned, very, very active, both defensively and up front, but she and Beth England were looking for each other constantly. And Martha Thomas in that first half was almost the player that was going to receive the ball off Beth England, or she was the player on the wing that was going to be like, okay, I can receive the ball once Beth England gets it. Beth England was not necessarily the sharpest with her touch, and you kind of needed to change a few things. So this is what happened in the first half here. This is a sequence where you can see England dropping deep to receive the ball from Neville. So there is exactly where it goes. Grace Clinton making a run. Beth England gets the ball, spots her just not quite neat enough, as not what they're looking for. Another moment here, again, Neville pulling up really high, and you see Beth England is the one dropping down to receive that ball. This was actually a really neat play. I feel like it would have been a very neat goal if it worked out, but you can again see that was the pass they're looking for. So there you go. It starts on the wing. Neville gets it, one pass touch. Really, really neat. Beth England again just loses it. Didn't have that first touch. Did not have that control of the ball. Coming into the second half, Beth England comes off. We've got Jessica Naz coming on. Kind of different players, but what that meant is that Martha Thomas was then kind of dropping in again to that false 9, almost 10 role as the player receiving. And I think Martha Thomas is a really good player when it comes to build up and hold up of the ball. We saw that at West Ham, I think, more prominently than United, just because of the setup that she's playing in. But again, you saw shades of really good ball hold up. Now, she's a striker. She can finish. She's powerful. We've seen that. There's a reason she's sitting that up high with goals, regardless of comments of stat padding or who she's scoring against. But she's a well-rounded attacking player, and I think that is why I'm so interested about seeing how she works with Beth England. But anyway, coming into the second half, Beth England came off. You had Martha Thomas as the player dropping down. You saw really kind of in the midfield deep from the get-go. This was literally in the first passes of the ball. You see Martha Thomas, again, pretty deep. You didn't see her come into these areas in that first half. She's playing really deep. She's available there to get the ball. She does eventually get the ball, but she's playing much lower than she was at the start of the game, or specifically in the first half. So that was a clear adjustment coming out into the second half. Now, literally it took 2 more plays of Martha Thomas dropping down very deep and involving themselves into that beautiful goal. I think I've watched that over 20 times, honestly, since it's happened, because it is just that good. And the fact that this is the Tottenham that we were watching last season in the relegation battle playing this kind of football is just, you've got to love that story. Regardless of which club you support. So again, very similar positioning into that first play that they played in the second half. She's playing pretty deep again within this range. And this is how the goal happens. She starts it, she finishes it. I mean, it is just beautiful. Like, you've just got to look back and enjoy it. And I mean, the rest is just beautiful. The passing network. I'm not even going to commentate on this. I just want you to come and watch. But it was Martha Thomas who actually starts off that play, and you still see her roaming around Caitlin Ford. Caitlin Ford, pretty poor not to track her or just kind of see the fact that, and then there you go, Martha Thomas gets in the goal. I have to say, poor defending, but also really poor goalkeeping. I mean, there was not even an attempt to get the ball there. But Jessica Naz with a beautiful run to grab the defender. Now, what does this mean for Arsenal? I think for Arsenal, this was very poor game management. Lacasse came on way too late. In the 90th minute, I'm not sure if a player like that could be brought on that late, given the instant impact she brings, and given the burst of energy and the chaos she causes in the box. You've got to bring her on at least half an hour earlier. And it's something that I want to see Jonas start to experiment with, is putting her on the left wing. Now, she plays on the left wing pretty occasionally for Canada. I see her do that in the Canadian setup, either, straight sub up into the left wing or just change during the game. She can do both left and right wing. And I think with Caitlin Ford having a pretty poor-ish game and just start to the season in general, I don't know why you wouldn't get a little bit experimental, or I guess brave, in putting a player who knows how to play in that position there. For Viviana Miedema, I'm not sure if she's just quite ready yet. When it's a big moment like this and it's a game that you desperately need to win, bringing on a player that's not fully fit just yet, I'm not sure if that's the right decision. Getting Palova off the pitch, for me, just killed a lot of the momentum and production that was happening in the middle. You know how good she can become when exposing pockets, and when Tottenham dropped that deep to defending, because really, again, like I mentioned, They could just sit there and defend. They had gone their goal. They had protected their wings very well. They knew they were covered in the middle. They knew they had Arsenal frustrated. And honestly, their goalkeeper absolutely smashed. Like, she did so well. No surprise she got player of the match. Thrilled to see her do this well. She got an ACL injury in the Champions League with PSG. Got this move to Tottenham. Has worked a little bit to get that first start. And for her first WSL start to be your North London derby, like, that's a lot of trust being thrown into. And she absolutely showed up. So I'm just thrilled to see her come after an ACL like this. In a general sense, really poor game management from Jonas, and just very wasteful with the shots. Like, Caitlin Ford was taking shots from just odd angles that you're just killing your possession. Frida Monum, like, don't get me wrong, she can smash a good one. We've seen her do it in the Champions League against Bayern, in the first season against Everton. She can put in a long shot goal. I'm just not sure you can take 6 or 7 of these that clearly are wasteful. In the last half an hour, Arsenal pretty much had all the ball and they did nothing with it. So there's got to be a discussion about being wasteful with the shots, being wasteful with overall possession, and recycling the ball too much. Again, understandably, there's nothing wrong with recycling the ball off the wing, and Arsenal do that very well usually. But to recycle and then really not have a creative outlet, could Lacasse have solved some of those answers? I think so, but it was too damn late when she came on. So for the Gunners, a very disappointing, I think, end to the year. But there's no way you come out with an expected 2.5 goals, 30 some shots. I mean, dominate possession, passes, literally every kind of stat except the scoreline. In a big North London derby, they've got to be really upset. For Spurs, this is a great win. Now, is this a blueprint of how to win? No. You cannot treat this game, or you cannot treat every game like this where you're defending and then just jumping on the opportunity. It's just simply not sustainable. And what I mean sustainable is that you're looking at a long-term success. Like, this is a great one-game win, but can you do this every single game? Not really. When you get absolutely beaten in shots on target, like possession, number of passes everywhere, it's not. You can't continuously do that game after game. But this could be used as a motivator. This could be used of, yes, we can trust our build-up play. Like, I think all they really needed was a bit of a chance to get the ball and build up from the back. And, their head coach has said that this is how we want to play. This is how we want to score goals, which is great. But can you really be sitting on a 0.4 expected goals every single game? Not really. Not every game is going to be like this, and not every game your opponent is going to be as wasteful as Arsenal was. So they want to play through the lines. I love it. I support it. You want to build from the back. I also love it and support it. But you've got to make it sustainable. You've got to put a blueprint on how you can have a bit of a long-term success, kind of a pattern that you consistently see game after game. What this does say is that Spurs, season after season, have closed the gap with Arsenal. Not too long ago they came very close to getting that win, and Miedema had a header in like the last 2 minutes and got the equalizer a few games before the North London derby at the weekend. They had a Conti Cup game, which was a 3-3 draw at full time, and then penalties. I didn't really want to look at that because it's just a heavily rotated teams on both sides, and looking at the Manchester City was similar. XG expected was just more of an accurate comparison. The team in general still needs a lot of work. I'm very excited to see about the recruitment that they're going to do in January. I think there's going to be some good, sneaky, young names coming in. Now, is it fair to say that Tottenham are closing the gap with the top 4? I don't think so. I don't think we're there just yet. When you got battered by City 7-0 a few games ago and lost to Manchester United, but it's a building step, and I hope this is a really big statement for the club to say, invest, like really, really heavily invest, not do like a one big buy off every other window. You bought Beth England, fantastic, that was a ton of money, but which direction is the club really aiming to go? How is the recruitment process looking like? And I'm convinced with the new head coach and staff in general that they brought in. Let's talk a little bit about that academy production. Like, there's a lot of room still to work, and it's only one win, but one win can do a lot, and it can change a lot of mentalities in the club, and it could be the momentum that this club was looking for to, end up high on the mid-table season. I think last season was just one to forget, one for the books, and it's a clean slate, and I like what they're doing so far, not what I'm doing so far. Anyways, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Did you see any of these patterns in the game? What do you think of the game overall? Was it bad game management from Jonas, which is just they got carried away with the win against Chelsea? I want to hear your opinions about it. Same thing goes with Spurs. Were you impressed? Should we be a little bit, they're onto something, or should we not get too ahead of ourselves? I'd love to hear your opinion. And as always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.